Thank you. Mr. Jack Nelson Pallmeyer, followed by Tyler Nord.
Well, thank you, Council, for agreeing to look at this resolution. I am Jack Nelson Pallmeyer. I'm actually one of the founders of this nonpartisan effort to have a community conversation all over this state. And it's starting to take off, by the way, all over the country. People in Des Moines heard about what the Minneapolis and St. Paul City Councils did and passed a resolution. Groups in Oregon are starting in Oregon ASAP. The citizens of Massachusetts, where they have a ballot initiative, recently passed a resolution in every county in Massachusetts during the last election, calling for an end to the wars, a reduction in military spending, protection of Social Security. There is an awakening going on all over this country and all over this state. Now, I have the privilege of traveling around the state a lot and meeting with lots of groups. And I just begin a conversation. It doesn't matter where I go, if it's a small town or a small city or a big city. And I just ask residents to talk about what's going on in their community and what's of concern to them and what needs aren't being met. And people are talking about libraries being cut or library hours being cut. They're talking about class sizes. They're talking about music programs being removed from high schools. They're talking about firefighters being laid off, city workers being laid off. All these unmet needs. And the dominant narrative that we live with at the federal level, at the state level, that you wrestle with. I feel bad for you representing cities, and I appreciate what you do. Because in many ways, you're being asked to reduce your governance to managing austerity. And what we're asking and what we're saying is that we have a possibility to change that narrative. I think it was Jesse James who was asked why rob banks, and he said it's because it's where the money is. And we've got to be looking at the impact of this military spending. I was really struck in researching one of the books I've written recently. And I came across a French historian who's famous in Europe. His name is Emmanuel Todd. And he's famous in Europe for having predicted the collapse of the Soviet Union. He said everybody was looking at the Soviet Union's military power. He said, I was looking at them unraveling from within. And he made the same prediction for the United States in the context of the Iraq and Afghan wars. We are told that we can't deal with child poverty. We can't deal with the issues of hunger. We can't make our education system better. What does it mean that next year the United States of America will spend more money in Afghanistan than the entire cost of our food stamp program for our country? All we are asking in this resolution is that we make connections between federal spending priorities, state spending priorities, and local city governance. Please support this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Tyler Nord, followed by Tom Gilliam.
Thank you, President Hartman, and once again, thank you for the City Council of all the time you dedicate. I'm sure going through the consent agenda is not the most exciting piece of business on a Thursday evening. I also understand that you have a threshold for the amount of speakers you want speaking on an issue. However, nobody previous to me has addressed the framework of our nation. I've noticed there's some reluctance from some of the city councilors to address this issue because it doesn't pertain to the city of Duluth in some sort of direct, blatant fashion. However, when they were debating such things as the Virginia-Massachusetts Compromise, the debate was, do we here in Washington and Philadelphia come up with the legislation and send it to them to administrate, or do they come up with the legislation and send it to us to administrate? Now, what we have here is a city within the democracy laboratory known as the state of Minnesota. For every 50 cents you have to spend on anything, you've already spent $1 out of the area to send to the Pentagon. Now, back in the 90s, they had the joke about the $50,000 toilet seat. Once again, that was allocated for military spending in the Pentagon. You're not sending them, cut spending from the F-35. You're telling the bureaucracy, look, you know full well that the F-35 is pretty fancy, but when the decision's made at the margin, buying 2,000 of them doesn't make any sense because the F-22 already exists, is built in the U.S., and outpaces Russian and Chinese military by a half a century, quarter century. You're not taking anything away from the Veterans Administration either, as previously pointed out. So once again, I bring back the focus. Minnesota sends $6 billion into the federal government, $4 billion back. The city of Duluth sends $1 on war and spends 50 cents on the city of Duluth. 7th Avenue was washed out for a really long time. Really long time. Just, there was a canyon in 7th Avenue East. I don't know how many troops died in Afghanistan during that time, but I know Afghanis died. And there's one battalion for the government of Afghanistan of 23 that can stand without international security force support. And I once again encourage you to start democracy and legislation where it's supposed to start, closest to the people. This has everything to do with the city of Duluth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nord. Our next speaker is Mr. Tom Gilliam, followed by Warren Howe. Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Warren Howe. Will actually be the end of our list of speakers.
Good evening, Council President Hartman and councilors. My name is Warren Howe. I live at 1112 South Lake Avenue. I am a U.S. Army veteran of what has been euphemistically called the Korean conflict. I'm here tonight to ask you to support the resolution in favor of shifting a portion of our military spending to domestic spending. You've heard and probably read many of the powerful, detailed arguments in favor of this proposal, and I don't intend to repeat them now. What I specifically wish to address is the claim, often made by councilors on proposals such as this one, that these are not the business of the City Council. Somebody just earlier mentioned that, and I'd like to be a little bit more inclusive. Because I claim otherwise. This is the business of the City Council. If even a minuscule fraction of the Pentagon budget is shifted to domestic spending on programs for the needy in our community, or for environmental, educational, nutritional, recreational programs, for housing, for safety, and other crucial community needs, this shift will benefit your constituents. These people that you have the responsibility to represent to the best of your ability. Clearly, a vote for this proposal is a vote for your constituents. This proposal is the business of the council. Thank you.
Thank you. That'll be the end of our list of speakers. So at this point, we'll go to council questions and comments. I'm going to allow Councilor Gardner to speak first if she wants. This is since she's your resolution. Or if you want, I can delay it.
If other councilors wish to speak, I'd like to hear what they have to say.
Okay. Go ahead, Councilor Kraus.
Thank you, President Hartman. I appreciate our speakers this evening, although I do provide a somewhat different perspective. Many points, different perspective. My belief is, in looking at macro and microeconomics, that many of our government shortfalls are for a little bit different reason. During thriving, booming times, elected officials tend to add with a short-term vision. The good times of the 90s, the dot-coms, how can this go on, how long? You'd read it in the Wall Street Journal endlessly, and we expanded what we provided. And then times slow down, and there's no more money stream to do all those things. And that's the problem with government. It's always viewed at this year what we can afford to do and maybe next year, but in 20 years, you can't afford it. And we keep doing that every time there's an economic expansion, which leads to difficult times like right now. I'm fortunate in some ways in that I get to sit on 2 manufacturing boards, one that represents Northwest Wisconsin, one that represents Northeast Minnesota.